Welcome to this week's edition of our Parresia podcast. That's the American Freedom Alliance podcast. I'm Dr. Karen Siegemund, the president of AFA and the host of Parresia. Parresia is the Greek word that means that one bold voice. That's what we aim to be, and our guests always exemplify exactly that trait. I'm delighted to have with me today a great friend, Peter McIlvenna, who hails from the UK. His Hearts of Oak podcast has millions upon millions of views and viewers. He reaches across the pond over to us from England as we need to reach across the pond to him, because the lessons that we can learn from what's going on in the UK are crucial to what's happening here. Peter, so glad to have you with us today.
No, thank you. When you say hails from the UK, that just sounds like I'm on Secure in America with Frank Gaffney.
No. And let me also add that he is on the board of directors of the American Freedom Alliance and a new fellow in our newly recrafted American Freedom Alliance Fellowship Program. Peter, it's an honor to have you on board in these various capacities with AFA.
Oh, it's good to be with you. And we talk a lot off camera, so why not on camera and recorded?
That's right. We do. And one of the topics that's come up, that's been coming up here in the U.S., given what's happening in Texas with Epic City and also the election of Mamdani and the capture in Dearborn, Michigan, and various other pockets, but in particular Texas right now, and I guess New York City. We've been watching what happens in Europe, and we've seen Paris captured, Berlin captured, Vienna captured, and of course, London. And you've had a few articles published by Gateway Pundit. They're gigantic, huge reception for your articles because this is such a crucial topic, and you're one of the only ones who we see in this country talking about it. That of grooming gangs, the rape of young girls, the betrayal by the justice system, the hierarchy of who's important, who's not important, and the suppression of all of this. Can you walk us through what a grooming gang is and why this is so important to you and to us here in the United States?
Well, this issue the UK has been at the epicenter, although you've got France, Germany, and Sweden also have suffered on this, but at a lower scale. And the grooming gangs are, in effect, mass Muslim rape gangs, family rape gangs, which is disgusting, sickening. But the first time it popped up was in 1975 at the front of a local newspaper, the Rotherham Advertiser, and it referred to white English girls being trafficked by Asian men. That was the terminology they used. But it wasn't well known. Very little was spoken about it. Then you had different breakthroughs. You had probably 2007, possibly 2005, a Labour MP begun to speak up about it. And she had lots of mothers come to her, and she lived in the north of England, talking to her about their girls being propositioned and being given alcohol and drugs by these men driving around very expensive cars, and basically then prostituting them out. And again, it didn't really hit the headlines until 2012, which is the front page of the Times newspaper in London, and it published a huge article, the main story on the front page, by a fearless journalist who just passed away last year, Andrew Norfolk. And he was their investigative reporter up in the north, and he begun to piece what was happening together. And what he saw and what we are now seeing is groups of men, and we have now had trials in 40, just over 40 towns in the UK. We have had just hitting 500 individuals now charged and arrested for these group gang rape, whatever. And So we have about 80 trials, 85 trials. It could actually be higher at the moment, all across the UK. So 40 towns, 80 plus trials, 500 people jailed, going on for 50 years. And why this happened is because the white establishment, the liberal establishment, are afraid of offence. Offence being the big word. Rape, hey, that's fine. Offence, oh no, we better not have that. And their worry, and two police chiefs have come out and said this, their worry is that if they clamped down on this, they would have a race riot. That was their terminology. It's been in the public eye a lot, but in the last few weeks, it's been, well, since the beginning of the year, Elon Musk highlighted the UK's anger at utter silence from our politicians and our media, here and there, bits and pieces, inquiries that cost a lot of money, produced findings and reports and recommendations, and none of them were ever implemented. And where we are now, beginning of last week, the front page of one of the newspapers, The Express, saying that the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, that fits into the nightmare scenario that New York are facing with Mamdani. He is also a socialist, very, very socialist, very, very liberal, and is a Muslim. And whereas that with Pride, his Gays for Gaza Pride, very strange. We'll make it into that. But that was on the front page of the paper last week. And then there was a grooming gang inquiry, the first inquiry into this. The government had been forced to do it. And 4 of the survivors who were on the advisory committee resigned and said they're just being ignored. And the government responded by calling them liars. That's how the government responded to these girls that had been through years of hell, absolute years of hell, with not being listened to, and suddenly they are put on this inquiry only to find themselves ignored. So that's what we have had in the UK. We've had similar gangs happening in Sweden. We've had similar gangs happening in Germany and also in France. But Karen, I know you know this, but for your audience, please do not think this is a far away problem that will not come near the US shores. Demographics are changing, and Islamophobia is a concept that is all across the West. And I think this is something that will be at your shores and could be happening internally and just being covered over. So that's a broad sweep of where we are.
It's such a shocking thing on so many levels. That it happens at all is shocking and appalling, and that it's been since 1975, or it's been emerging since 1975. No doubt it's been occurring since long before then. So the demographics are changing, but one of the other issues, and I want to get into the demographics as well, but one of the issues that's so puzzling is we've here, and I don't know about Europe, the Me Too movement was so huge. And even before that, girls, we were told how you dress, how you act, that should have nothing to do with if you were raped or not. If you were raped, it's because men are evil. And so it really played into the whole toxic masculinity narrative, and Me Too movement played into that as well. So in the hierarchy, girls had more status than men. Always. The girls were always right. Anybody who made any accusation was right at any level, and the men were always in the wrong. Girls were blameless. The men were completely at fault. And now we're seeing with this complete inversion, but it's not just men, is it, Peter? It's Muslim men and the Muslim culture, as it were, and this idea of these family gangs. How is it that family gangs of Muslims must be protected to the deep detriment, damage, pain, all the awfulness, the literal victimization of these young girls? How are the Islamic men and families given more status believability, coddling than these young girls are. How is this possible, Peter?
That's a big question. Let me try and do one by one and pick that apart a little bit. Firstly, you've got a fear in the West, and the fear is a rightly held position because we have seen Islam spread by the sword. You just look at how it went in North Africa, and it spread by the sword. The opposite of how Christianity spread, which was about sharing the good news, a new message of hope. And again, it's very different concepts even when the term martyr is used. In Christianity, the term martyr is used for someone who is killed for their faith. And we see, I think, 11 of the 12, if not all of the 12 disciples, lost their lives because they were sharing their faith. In Islam, martyrdom is very different. And this is where we have the whole understanding of jihad, of struggle, of what that means, and the lesser and greater jihad. But it basically boils down to if you give your life in the name of your belief, you will go straight to paradise. That is, I think it's possibly the only way you go direct to paradise, because in Islam, there's no absolute, there's no certainty. Allah may have a bad day that day, and it's about your good deeds outweighing your bads. And therefore, if you haven't done it, even if you've done enough, walking across to paradise on that glass bridge, you can still be flicked off because Allah's not happy with you. So there's no absolutes, there's no certainties. And imagine having that fear of what happens to you when you die. There is a caveat, and the key to get to paradise is to give your life to get to paradise, so to be a martyr. And that's why we have the suicide squads in Israel. That's why you've got the whole ideology from Hamas. That's why in the West we have had Islam since 9/11, and you look at the figures and it's frightening. And it is about if you kill yourself and kill others in the name of a religion, in the name of Islam, then you go to paradise and you get your 72 virgins and all of that. So that's well known in Islam. So again, we have completely different concepts, and women as well, a completely different concept of how you treat other people. It's not love your neighbor as yourself. It's a supremacist ideology that because you're a Muslim, you are greater than others. And then how women are treated, which is a second-class citizens, having half or a quarter of the testimony in a court. So if a woman is raped, then she needs to bring forward multiple witnesses to a man's one witness. Therefore, she is a second-class citizen. And non-believers, how they're treated in many Islamic countries, everyone is under the Sharia law, the Islamic law, whether you're a Muslim or not, whether you've chosen or not. By being in that country, you're under that. And that's why I think anyone in the West who loves freedom is the most foolish individual if they choose to live in the Middle East, because no matter how free you're told it is, you're under Islamic law. And if you cross that line, it's you who will fall foul, and not the Muslims in the country. So and again, with human rights, whenever the West came up with the Convention on Human Rights, you then had a separate one for the Islamic world, which is the Cairo Declaration. And that is, everyone has all these rights, and at the end, but everything is subject to Sharia law. Therefore, you don't have any rights, because Sharia law means that non-believers, kafirs, do not have the same rights, women do not have the same rights, and it goes on and on. So again, these are concepts of human rights and what that means, of equality to women, of equality to people who do not follow that faith. All those are different concepts. And I guess whenever you bring someone over to the West and they're from a country where that is the norm, because these countries, there's no difference between the culture and the religion. There's no difference between the judicial system and the religion. There's no difference between the food system and the religion. Everything is one.
Yeah.
Everything is one. It's not that you have your private life and then there's religion. No. Everything comes under that religious umbrella. And therefore, when we import these individuals who know nothing about the freedoms we have in the West and have never come across a woman from their family except one that is fully clothed in a black sheet, then no wonder we've got problems. That's why we are importing men who have never been taught to control yourself, never taught to control your urges. You drop them in a warm country. Now, Britain isn't the warmest. This is why it may be happening over in Texas or elsewhere. But you drop them in a country where women may not be clothed the same way as in the Middle East. And that is a green light for them to do whatever they want to do. So those are some of the, but it's this, when you have a conversation and we are saying one thing, but someone who's a Muslim is using the same terminology, but they mean something completely different. That's, I think, where the confusion lies.
But how is it that's such a great exposition, Peter, of the clash of civilizations, or yeah, we can leave it at that. But even so, how is it that England and these other places have been so thoroughly captured by this other ideology that's so completely inimical to everything that we hold dear, that you hold dear? I mean, you just outlined one view of rights versus another, one Judeo-Christian values that's one way and Islam is another way. You're a country that's thousands of years old. How is it possible that it got so completely captured and all these fundamental notions have been thoroughly inverted and have capitulated? It's
Well,
astounding that this has happened.
no, it
And
is.
it's a
And
warning. I mean, I ask because this is the warning. It happened to you. How can it have it? How can we keep it from happening to us? So how did it happen there?
well, it's identity. It's lack of identity. It's not knowing who you are. And my concern is, although the US, although Americans have got faith flag and freedom, or faith value and freedom, and there are concepts that you come around, the US being a mix of all different people that come around an idea, as opposed to maybe 1,000 or 2,000 years of history. So there are very different ways of looking at how a nation comes together and defines itself. But in the UK, we no longer know what it is to be British, and we have the confusion with the four nations, of course: England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. So you've got that identity, and I think that, I think that answers the question, because in Northern Ireland, you've got a very strong identity. I grew up with flags on every lamppost, and it was one or the other. It was the tricolour of the Republic of Ireland or the Hand of Ulster in the Northern Irish flag. So you had that. You go to Scotland, and again, there's a rich history and a heritage and a tradition, and they understand what it means to be Scottish. The same in Wales. They understand what it means to be Welsh. England are the kind of odd one out in this, the black sheep of the family. They have lost their understanding of what it means to be English. And then on top of that, you've got Britishness, bringing all those together. But whenever you now ask people what it means to be English, it's what? Fish and chips, tea, and the royal family. Is that really what will get us through cultural crisis? Let's have a cup of tea. No, those are parts of what it means to have an English culture, but it doesn't define it. And I would argue it goes to our teacher training colleges being captured by cultural Marxism in the early 60s. That's part of it. The cultural Marxists captured our teacher training colleges. They then trained up the teachers, and we are wondering why you have all the blue-haired lesbian teachers in, and no men involved anymore in the schools. And you go back, well, it's the teacher training colleges. You capture that, you capture a nation. You capture the education system, you capture the nation. I know, Karen, you know a lot and are passionate about the education side. But you've got that, the education being captured. But the second failure, I think, in the United Kingdom is the collapse of the church. We are one of the few countries that have a state church. We are one of maybe only, I think, I believe only with the Iranian parliament, which I don't think is a great connection. But in terms of having clerics, in terms of having religious figures, I mean, can you imagine having like 20 odd bishops in the House of Representatives or the Senate? It wouldn't happen. It's not how you do things. But we in England have got the 24 bishops, the spiritual lords. And maybe if you go back to, you probably have to go back to a few Archbishop of Canterbury's to find one that probably believed in God and believed what the Bible said and that was an inerrant word of God. Now, those bishops, instead of spending their time talking about biblical truths and what that means for the nation, they probably spend more time talking about immigration and environmental issues. And I think that shows where, I mean, I was in a Church of England church, I'll admit it, a few weeks ago, and they had their prayer time. And the prayer time was, and we had just had, President Trump had just arranged the peace deal in whatever shape that is, but the killing has stopped and we will see how that develops. That's another topic. But I thought, wonderful, we'll pray about this in the service. But of course, that most churches have Trump arrangement syndrome, and therefore they certainly weren't going to. So they prayed for the wars that were happening in Gaza. Of course, couldn't even mention the word Israel. So they prayed for that. They prayed for, it was World Poverty Day. They prayed for immigrants who feel unsafe, and they prayed and asked God to forgive us all for our failures in global warming. So those were, and it was, this is like a party political broadcast of the Green Party or of some left wing. And yet that was a church. So I think that's what it means. The church has lost its purpose in providing a guide for the nation and now has collapsed into this woke ideology and has replaced the word of God that is absolute and gives clear guidance on what life is, whether it's what a man and woman is, etc., 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 all the way through. You look in the Bible, gives you that guidelines. We no longer have that in the church, and we no longer have it in public life. So I think it's that the teacher training college has been captured, education being succumbed into that culture Marxist agenda, and the collapse of the church.
And the church as well. And, you know, when you mentioned about the bishops, that this idea of bishops being in our House of Representatives and that you have political representation in your government, as you said, one would hope that the religious, the Christian influence would penetrate government, but the influence went completely the other way. And this is so, it's got to be so painful because you take heart at some of these junctures that, oh, now there will be some kind of positive morality influence, biblical influence, but it doesn't go the other way. It subverts the church instead, and then you're left with nothing. But I also wanted to add, you mentioned Scotland, Ireland, Wales having a sense of nation. Isn't their sense of nation not only of their own nation, but in large part oppositional to England? Isn't this how they define their own nationhood? As being distinct from England, so England has no one to push back against? I don't know, just tossing that out there.
No, it's true. And to take an analogy from the Middle East, it's exactly the issue of Palestinians and Israel.
Right, that's right.
Their entity, their understanding, their makeup, everything about them is about hatred of their neighbor, and that's what defines them. So, and in a way, we've got the same, although thank God it's not at that same level of animosity, because Scotland does not have 1,300 years of hatred, which Islam has to Israel, to the Jews. But yeah, we have that antagonism between Scotland and England, and part of that comes from England being the major party within that four nation grouping. It is the powerhouse. It is the largest, much larger in population size. It's the largest economically, and it is the largest in terms of the English Empire. You didn't have the British Empire as such, because remember, those nations only came together much more recently. It was 1808. I think it was 1808. Scotland and England. I'll need to double check that, but I think it's 1808 of the Act of Union. Or it could be 1708. My goodness, my figures are really bad. Um, but but it is those were set, and Scotland and England had many wars. Wales less so. Ireland, of course, you've got a lot of anger. Part of the Irish anger against England is because England used Ireland as a playground for the knights of the realm. Basically, handed them what they wanted. And a knight would arrive in Ireland and be given a parcel of land, only to be told by the king, "What are you doing? The king of Ireland, the king of the regions of Ireland. That's not yours. What are you doing?" And that's where a lot of the tension came from. But you're right. A lot of the anger has always been Scotland, that have a proud history against England. I think part of it maybe is jealousy, but England don't. They like to point out that they are the strongest in the union, and that doesn't always go down so well. But it's a union of four countries that is kept together through better for worse. The problem we now have actually is the nationalist parties. The Nationalist Party, the Scottish Nationalist Party, Plaid Cymru in Wales, the nationalist parties in Northern Ireland, which is a little bit more confused, but they've really become woke parties on steroids. It's less about nationalism and more about adopting any woke ideology and destroying your nation. So Scotland is the first to push for same-sex marriage. It was the first to push for transitioning being available for the whole trans agenda. So they've always been pushing that hard. And that doesn't necessarily fit. You can be a nationalist party, but in the UK, those nationalist parties have traditionally been on the left, which is peculiar because nationalism, we're told, is something on the right. National identity, populist parties wanting the best. Tell Viktor Orban that nationalism is more on the left, and that would be confusing. So, yeah, the UK is a strange mix, but you're right. It's partially it is hatred against England.
But you're tying it just by the way, historically, we've seen the union of nationalism and socialism, and it doesn't bode well. So this is a little bit concerning. But you're comparing England and the nations around it to the Middle East with Israel. That's absolutely fascinating because the Muslim countries that surround it, their entire being is to be counter to Israel, and Israel must be wiped off the face of the earth, and so on. That's their entire being is centered around that. And Israel is less a biblical nation than what one would have thought. Also, right? Their identity. Well, now it's survival mode, I would imagine. So they're going to be less preoccupied with being biblical, but so this mapping is very interesting. How does this? Let's get back to the grooming gangs though in England and latest developments that have been happening with the courts betraying these girls. How is all this playing out and why?
Well, just to correct two things I said, sorry, that Wales joined the Union 1530, Scotland joined
Okay.
1707. So
Okay.
just
Good.
apologizing for.
That's the number.
Anyway,
Glad to have
uh,
that.
uh, I
Good.
just corrected my historical inaccuracies. We always like to apologize, say I was wrong on something. So there you go. Moving on to the grooming gangs. It was this article I wrote in Gateway Pundit a couple of days ago. And it's this legal case that I have overseen. And what happened was a lot of these cases, so you would have had the perpetrators in the court. The judge rules they're guilty of multiple cases of child rape. They get varying sentences from 23, 24 years down to 5 years for that crime. Try and work that out, why you have the varying degrees of that. So this has been happening time and time again, but we realised that a number of us had talked about this. I talked to Lord Pearson about it, Robin Tilbrook, who's a lawyer involved, Alan Craig, who I know once got a Hero of Conscience award over there at the AFA, and a good friend of mine. And we realised that all the girls get is respite from their rapist for a couple of years. So all they get is their rapist is in a different location, as in a prison, and for a couple of years, and then they come out. The state doesn't say you have been wronged and therefore there has to be financial retribution. They get zero. So they go through the system, they're cross-examined, often by their rapist. They go through, they relive the trauma. The individuals are then sent to jail, and these are always gangs, they're always groups of, I think the minimum I've seen is 4, sometimes up to 17 in these gangs. So they're sent to prison. The girls are left in chaos because their life is in a mess. They're and we did a report because you have to go through this, and it's the damage of their earning capacity. This is what you need to go through to actually get a financial settlement. The girls go and they get medically examined to talk about the trauma this is, why you should have to do that. But then because of the trauma, it damages their prospect of working. So we went through all of this to prove to the court the dire situation they're in. And we said, why don't we talk to one of these girls and say, we will walk you through the process so you actually get the money from you sue them, you get compensation from the rapist. So Alan and Lord Pearson and Baroness Cox had met up with Liz in North England, in Rotherham. And this was going back early 2020, late 2019, and had talked to her and had suggested that if we were able to pull the money together and put a team, that we actually could get. Now, it means the girl has to, in effect, go through the process again. Not necessarily be cross-examined. We made sure that didn't happen, but they have to kind of relive part of it. She, as a very strong individual, and you realize what these girls have been through, and yet their tenacity, their strength of character, not all, but many of them. So we started this process. So we won an award 2.5 years ago. The judge awarded £425,000, which is around $550,000. So just over $500,000. And that we thought wonderful. I naively, not knowing the judicial system, now hating the legal system, but not realising that actually there's now a process to go through past that. I thought the judge awards the money, you then are able to then begin to access the money. But no, you then need to ask permission to get an enforcement order to enforce it from the individual who has property, who has assets. Surely the court should say automatically, the award is this, he's got a house, he must sell it immediately. But no, you need to go and ask for that. And at each stage, you need to pay £10,000. So you need to ask permission to get the fees redacted and quashed. So each time you have to say, okay, we want to go for an enforcement. Please, we don't want to pay $10,000. Why should she have to pay $10,000? So the court decide and they have a think. And a few months later, they said, yes, we will cancel the fees. Wonderful. So then you put in your application and then you wait for a court date. We submitted the application for enforcement order 13 months ago. We have not heard a single thing from the courts. Nothing. Now, you can look at it that the courts are dysfunctional because of the COVID tyranny because of the destruction of all our institutions. Huge backlog, yes. You can look at the DEI of bringing in people who can barely speak English into the courts. Yes, you've got that. At cuts to the funding, yes, you've got that. But I think there's something more sinister. And this follows the pattern that we've seen for decades. And this is a desire by MPs, by local officials, by child services, by the police, and by the courts to turn a blind eye. And I think that's where we are currently at, because this, all it is the bit of paper to be taken and a date to be given. All it takes is to type an email and to book a court, whether that's in 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, a month. It's a simple, very simple process. And yet 13 months later, they can't even book a courtroom for this to happen. And my thinking is that the courts do not want to give this, because this will be the first time that a girl actually is able to get compensation, and I will happily be the estate agent. I will happily sell that property. And at the moment, we think that the man owns half and the wife owns half. So we will sell it. We will then take half of the money, and that half will go to Liz. That's where we're going. We're 4.5 years into this legal case. And this is now the final hurdle we are at, getting the enforcement order. But the system is doing everything it can to stop this happening. So that's where we currently are. And we want this to open the floodgates to many other girls, this to be an example across the UK, and to be an example in other countries to see whether this is happening elsewhere.
Which, of course, is why they're doing everything to stop it, right? It would open the floodgates. Is there such a thing as class action suits, or does it have to be one after another?
It really has to be one after the other. Our system is so different than yours. Thankfully, it's not as crazily expensive as yours, but there are pros and cons in both our systems. But in the end of the day, the people that benefit are the lawyers, the solicitors, the barristers, the judges, because they all get their money. It's actually justice that is often blocked. But class action lawsuits are more difficult. It is possible, but it is more difficult. But we'll see when we get this out of the way, because my priority is for Liz to get the money. It cannot be, oh, we could start no, we haven't finished this one. Let's show we can finish the first one. And then that is a model for moving forward.
It seems, too, during the course of all of this since 75 and all the various inquiries, and now what's happening now, with even an award being impeded, the message that this gives to society at large is you all, the girls, but Britons are second-class citizens, and you are being held hostage to the potential for violence and the actual violence of Muslims who we let in with open arms. So the Muslims hear that they can get away with anything, and your young British girls are hearing they're nothing but fodder for this depravity of a kind that's really I keep struggling for words. It's so astounding. It's not just violence. Rape is a violence of an entirely different kind. And when you talk about loss of potential earnings and so on, the destruction that it does to one's entire identity, and the time that we're given here on Earth has just been corrupted in such a fundamental way. But the girls are left suffering, and the men are left where we can still keep the house and don't worry about it. And the courts
They are.
It's breathtaking.
And let me give you.
Capture is it boggles my mind. What happened to lovely bucolic England? Cotswolds, it's just all storybook, and yet this is happening.
Well, a lot of those places that we all remember as England have become Islamic. A lot of those northern cities that were traditional English manufacturing, actually they are generally very, very Islamic. Some of those towns are majority, as in the majority are Muslims as opposed to Christian. But also a snapshot of just the scale of this. Sarah Champion, who's a Labour MP, so a socialist MP on the left. She is from Rotherham. She's the MP there. She's done a lot of good work on this, so to her credit. But she was doing an interview, I think it was in the Daily Mirror 5 years ago. And in the interview, she said that she thinks up to 1 million girls have been affected by this. So I know others have talked about figures of certainly 200,000, 250,000. These are huge figures. It's not, and one is wrong. I'm not saying that numbers matter in terms of the awful situation, but when you realize the scale, and the term has been used, this is on an industrial scale, because if you're looking at hundreds of thousands have done this, and the father of Liz, he was arrested by the police for complaining to the police his daughter was being raped. He told them where the flat was. They arrested him. We have got courts collapsing cases. We had the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, the link between the government and the courts, in effect. They gather the evidence and they make a decision whether there is enough reasonable evidence and whether it's in the public interest for it to go ahead. And they collapsed numerous cases. There was a case up in North England maybe 4 years ago. I think it was 17 or 22. And the CPA, Crown Prosecution Service, after a year investigation, turned up to the court with no evidence, zero. So the case collapsed. They actively collapsed the cases. We have these girls being questioned and all the footage disappearing from all those hours of footage and it disappearing. We have these girls being arrested for prostitution. They're 13, 14, 15. We have them arrested and charged for possession of alcohol or drugs. They're the ones being plied. So it's just an utter failure. And even maybe you could have said early on the police didn't realize what was happening.
Yeah.
I mean, this can't be happening. But then when it came to light, when it was the front page of the Times newspaper in 2012, 13 years ago, everyone could read it, everyone saw it. And yeah, the police still are failing and are blaming the girls for this. And it's like we're living in an Islamic country. I mean, It's the girl's fault. It's not the man's fault. No. This is Britain. Surely they have the right and the protection under the law. So that gives just a little snapshot, Karen, of the scale. And I know that'll be difficult for your viewers to understand. Sadly, I've been looking at this area for many years. And those are the figures. And they tell a very sad story of the fabric of the UK and the destruction of these girls' lives.
It's breathtaking. But also to hear you talk, this is such a failure also of what one would imagine would be a natural ally, which would be the feminists. So it seems to put the lie to this whole idea that feminism was ever for women, and rather than a new Marxist ploy for undermining everybody, including women and of course including men. Are you seeing anything different, or is that the case? Where are the feminists, Peter? Where are the feminists?
Well, I think they're part of the red-green axis.
Yeah, exactly.
As but it's this weird. It's the gays for Gaza. It's this weird connection between left-wing causes, especially when you look at parts of feminism, parts of the Me Too movement, when you look at especially the whole LGBT issue, and all of that, and the culture of Marxism seems to have found a cohort in Islam. And not all, there are Islamic groups that are very angry about how children are being indoctrinated in LGBT agendas. So you've got some of that, but by and large at the top, you've got this connection between the hardcore aggressive socialist policies that take away the rights of the individual and Islam, which also takes away the rights of the individual because it's a collective. You've no way of not being called a Muslim. You've no way of leaving Islam. You're born into it, you die into it. You're part of that collective, and that's what defines you. The same way as you talk to someone who is engrossed in the LGBT ideology, their sexuality, their gender, whatever defines them. Hello, I'm so and so, and I'm gay. Well, why would you tell? We've just met. That's a weird piece of information when we first met. What are you proposing? But and with Islam, with the women wearing the headscarf, with the men wearing the beard, of course, copying Muhammad. Again, it's a visible sign, and it
Yeah.
defines them. And I mean, when you look at the wedge, I think like Christianity, what define, well, it might be a little cross or something, but that's it. And I think we have shied away from identity, our cultural identity in the West, the freedoms that gives, that Judeo-Christian heritage, and yet Islam and often the Marxist agenda is. They want to enforce it. Whether it's purple hair, whatever it is, it's just, this is me. You know my identity before I even say hello.
Right. Um, and of course, we're starting to see exactly this here. So briefly, let's talk about Mamdani, but then I really want to talk more about what's happening in Texas. So Mamdani, obviously following in the footsteps of potentially of Sadiq Khan, where the mayor of the capital of capitalism represents the enemy on every front. What warnings can you give us on that score?
Well, it's the danger. If it was a socialist Muslim that wasn't able to present himself, but yet you watch him and it's like, oh, have you been watching TED Talks? It's that ability to communicate. That's the danger when you have got good communication skills and then you've got an evil ideology mixed with that. And often communication can mask that. Communication can push forward an agenda, an idea, because of how it sounds. It sounds so good, sounds so pleasing. It comes from someone who seems such a plausible individual. It's exactly what we have in London, Sadiq Khan. He comes across as very plausible, is generally a good speaker, and because of that, he has managed to be mayor. There's no limits on how often you can be mayor in London. That's the scary thing. I think he's in his third term now. It becomes just a blur,
Yeah.
having Sadiq Khan as your mayor. But I think he is the prototype. He is the template that someone like Mamdani will see. Very left ideology and slipping Islam into that. And of course, as we saw with Komu, that debate, it was, how often have you been to a mosque? Have you been to any mosque? Why would you go to a mosque? It's like, but it's like saying to me, have you been to the local Hindu temple? No, I've never been to a Hindu temple. Why would I go there? It's just utter stupidity. But using that, the power of dropping an idea into people's mind that because you haven't gone into a mosque, you hate Muslims and therefore you've no right to stand. And it is that power of words and speech and analogy that he uses even more powerfully than Sadiq Khan. But we have London being captured, a multicultural city, as is New York. Very multicultural, very mixed. But come on, it's been the Irish and the Jews. So how did you get to have Mamdani? I don't know.
Well, that's a good question too. But as you say, that the charisma, the youth, and when you were talking about that, it reminded me of somebody else, a major figure in American politics, which is Barack Obama, who brought these exact same ideologies and who was a smooth talker and very charismatic and sounded very plausible and, my goodness, post-racial. But the difference, it strikes me, Sadiq Khan is more open. I'm sorry, Mamdani is much more open about his positions than Sadiq Khan, who is also much more open about Obama's, when Obama sort of slid in under these things. And if you said he was a Muslim, people shouted you down. And if you said he had socialist ideologies, people shouted you down. He was supposedly this new, it's not, is government in what can it, a new way of being an American and all of this, the new path, post-racial, like I said. So, but we all knew this, and then we've got these new figures who are much more brazen about it. So in a sense, he's paved the way. I hadn't really,
Well, he has,
right?
but I think Mamdani is successful because of Trump, and in that I mean because in the
Mm,
UK we do not have a popular figure that stands for freedom, for free speech, and for national identity. We have Nigel Farage, yes, but he has become a media darling because he has moved much more to the left. Trump doesn't move anywhere unless he wants to. So
mhm.
he is there. He stood for what he believes, and he hasn't really changed. Certainly not in the last 12 years that I've watched him. Maybe he was more liberal earlier on, but certainly not in the last 12 years. So I think in the UK, we have no figure on the right for someone on the left to play off and then therefore do better.
Right, right,
I
right.
think because of the success of Trump, the flip side of that is you will have figures on the other side that rise up in the hit of Trump. Just like we were talking about Scotland hitting England
Right,
or
exactly.
Hamas hitting Israel. In a way, I think you've got a figure that's risen up um, as the figure to take on Goliath, and that's what Trump is. And I think that's maybe, and I haven't studied Mandami closely at all. End up having enough things in the UK, and a lot of things in the UK do translate into the US as well. So there's always this bridge across. The issues we face are all the same. It's just you've got different figures or
Right.
different concepts within them, but they're the same issues we all face.
They are exactly the same issues. And to mentioning about Trump and positioning oneself as counterpoint, I would just add Governor Newsom now that's exactly he since there's nothing he can point to that's a success in California, all he can say is I'm the anti-Trump. And so yeah, that's exactly what we're seeing in the Middle East, in the UK, and in the US with people making their entire name as being against a thing rather than for a thing, and that's a little bit not entirely, but, with Newsom, that is in its entirety. Let's talk about Texas now. What's happened Texas, to many of us, is emblematic of what the United States is, and it is under attack maybe for that reason, but it's under attack by an Islamic incursion that you're now playing a role in counteracting it. What's going on in Texas, Peter? Why is it
It's
a
it,
battleground?
well, it's interesting because my fear is that you in the US think that there are areas that will always be the ones to stand against oppression. Um, and yet that's not always the case. Just because it's been historically so doesn't mean it will be in the future. We need to fight for those freedoms continuously. And I think actually they was it Texas just have raised 3 billion of new property taxes at a time where Florida is wanting to get rid of property taxes. So it's interesting how these two big states, both on the right, how they're maybe playing a slightly different path. And I think that Florida um, is more hardcore in some of these issues. I think that Texas has maybe been caught off guard, and I'm not sure why that has happened. I don't think it's as red a state as it should be and could be, um, especially when you look at Trump's victory on the presidential side. That didn't necessarily, I don't think, equate to Republicans having that huge position in in the Texas legislatures, and
That's right.
and Islam seems to have creeped in. This is not, it's not a Paris problem. It's not a Swedish problem. It's not a London problem. It's not even just a Michigan problem. It seems to be coming to some of the heartlands of what makes America America, those freedoms. And a huge concern Texas, and looked into this obviously with Epic City, what has happened there. I'll going over to Texas very soon, and I've been told we'll show you some areas and you'll see a number of mosques and very big changes happening. I'm thinking, this is Texas. And maybe it's the frog in the kettle boiling and not getting it. That's maybe what it is. Because I know when people come to London, Karen, they say, wow, this London, this has all changed. And I'm thinking, well, it's kind of bit by bit, and therefore I don't see it living here. And maybe it's the same with those in Texas. And my concern is that Texas think they can defeat this through legislation. This is not a legislative process. You can legislate, you can't have Sharia courts. Wonderful. But what will happen is the communities will work locally and they will recommend that they have tribunals to help them deal with internal matters. And that's going to save your police. That's going to save your legal system money if we deal with it internally. That was the argument for Muslim arbitration tribunals in the UK. That was put through, and we now have 70-odd Sharia courts happening, and the police don't go anywhere near. So what will happen is, a roadmap for you, is that there'll be calls from communities to set up these groups to sort out issues within. Local officials will think, hell yes, this is so much easier. And then it'll begin to move towards the police having areas, not as no-go areas, but areas they don't need to go because it's someone else's problem. They can deal with it. They're saving money, so they can deal with other areas. I think you'll see a widening happening, and it will take a while to see. But I know going around parts of London that were traditional. I mean, the bells of Bow, which was, if you could hear the bells of Bow, then you were a Londoner. And just over a mile away is Whitechapel, which is one of the most Islamic areas now in London. And things change. And I think I have a big concern that Americans may think this is purely legislation, and because someone makes a speech or passes a law on something, that will fix it. But it will come under a different guise. You'll not have Sharia courts, you'll have arbitration tribunals. You'll not have halal food, and they'll come up with another terminology. You'll not have Sharia finance, it will be finance that's ecological or environmental or caring for other groups, or they'll come up with other terminologies and it will slip in and it will grow and then it will take over from within. That's my concern. And I'm looking forward to going over and spending time with the number in Texas. It's been a while since I was over there, got a year and a half, I think. But I want to actually understand from people on the ground, how did you get to this situation? This is how we got this situation in the UK. And this is your roadmap to try and get you out of the chaos and the crisis that you're going to come up against.
That they find ways of wrapping something in terminology that makes it not only palatable, but eager. Include just the word inclusive. How can you be against inclusivity? How can you be against sustainability? The left, the red-green axis, the red-green alliance, is very cunning with how it finds a way to seep into everything. And you're right to warn us about legislation, because they are absolutely, completely determined. And Texas, it's not like this is, I don't know, it's Texas. It's emblematic of everything the United States is. And Texans, are you finding people recognizing the threat? Obviously, some people, they're having you out, but are there warnings falling on deaf ears, or are people genuinely concerned enough to take the kind of action that needs to be taken?
That's the $1 million question. So I think Epic City was a wake up, and I think it was a silver lining to that cloud, because that could have gone under the radar. That has brought up the conversation, certainly in Texas, on separate areas for Muslims, on what is Sharia law. I think it will move the conversation to the halal food industry, to Sharia banking. Both of those are very small in terms of their global impact, but are growing rapidly in the US. All of that, And then on top of that, you need to have a conversation on women, women's rights and segregation, all of that.
Yes.
We have a lot of, you go down a high street in London and more or less all the takeaways will have halal symbol in the window. You go to leisure centres and it will show you posters of all the dress that is allowed in, and it will be Islamic dress. You will, so it's moving towards that. And on a Friday, many of the footpaths in most high streets in London are solid blocked because of the call to prayer, because of Friday prayers, because of men praying. Of course, women can't because they would invalidate the prayer of a man, just like a dog would. So you couldn't have a woman go near you when you're praying. So it's just men praying. But that is the visible takeover that we are seeing. I think because of Epic City, I think there is a wake up. I think I've seen a number of legislators talk about it. I have seen more media figures talk about it. And this is no longer seen as an outlier issue. It seems to be pulling into the centre. That is my hope. And of course, you've been speaking about this, Karen. Frank Gaffney has been speaking about this. You've got some voices that have been speaking about. I mean, Jack Posobiec has been talking about this for years. Has written books on this. So I think there is an appetite and a desire to address this. It will have to be difficult conversations because how do you get out from where you are? So we'll see. I'm looking forward to having the conversations, and I'm not going to hold back. I'm just going to say, guys, if you want to solve this, if Texas cannot solve this, there's no hope for America. Texas being so many conservative organizations, so many well-financed organizations, if you cannot put your resources behind standing up against Islam and all that it proposes, then you no longer have a republic anymore. The US is gone. It's completely disappeared. That's what I would say. So it's time to stop playing games and actually come up with a strategy of what it means to be American, to have those freedoms, and what you do. Look, we did it with communism. There was a concerted fight back in the US, in the UK, and we saw the threat. Islam, we haven't seen the threat in such a stark way, and we need the top levels, echelons of leadership all across America to wake up. And so I'll see. I'll report back to you when I arrive back, Karen, to see whether the conversations were fruitful or not, because they have to be. This is a battle we all face. This is a battle you face, we face here in the UK, across Europe. We all have to win this.
Well, and I wish you absolutely I don't want to say the best of luck, but that your trip be very fruitful. But it's so interesting, yet another pattern here. The threats are the same, but also the vulnerability is the same, in that we have also lost our sense of national identity, which, again, it's not lost. It was undermined deliberately. Churches, teachers, colleges, wokeism, the left's long march through the institutions has undermined all our institutions and yours, including our national pride. And that's what makes us completely vulnerable, families and churches that are supposed to be the bulwark. So I hope you remind them in Texas of all the good, all the things that we have to be grateful for, that we need to stand up for, because that seems to be, there's the threat side and then there's our vulnerability side. That's our vulnerability.
No, I agree. And this is a long fight, and this is not going to be won by a single presidency in President Trump. This is a long fight back because the degradation is so big. And this will have to be a multi-presidential term fight back to actually win back. And I just hope and pray that MAGA are up for it in actually reclaiming that and putting America first. And it can't be just a slogan. It has to be actions and boots on the ground.
And is there a perception in your fight, we could talk forever, in the UK, that do you feel more hopeful when we have President Trump in office here than when we have a Biden, Harris, pro socialist red-green axis president?
Hell yes. Be in response to that, yes. So, oh, yes. I mean, America sets the agenda hugely. So whenever you've got someone who is good driving America forward, that is good for the world. So 100%, the huge euphoria in parts of the UK, the parts that haven't been injected with Trump derangement syndrome, but there is huge hope and excitement. And we've just, I mean, JD Vance getting involved in with Apple. With Apple wanted to open, when the UK government were forcing Apple to open up a back door, JD Vance got personally involved and that stopped. So the Trump administration, President Trump, those on the team, they understand these threats, especially to free speech in Europe and the UK. And I think that partially fits into Islam because Islam is also a threat to free speech. So, of course, we are very much more hopeful with President Trump in. Being Sleepy Joe or cackling Kamala for another 4 years would have been utterly catastrophic.
Yeah.
So 100% much better that Trump's in the White House than not. Yes.
Well, Peter, thank you so much for taking all this time. I know we talk frequently, but I really appreciate your taking the time for us today on this episode of Parresia. You can find all of them on our Rumble, YouTube. Find more. We're on Getter. Peter, where can people find you?
They can find us at Hearts of Oak everywhere and at Hearts of Oak UK. On X, we stream on War Room. We stream on Naomi Wolf's Daily Clout. Stream on X American News. Brannon House, we stream there. Heartsofoak.org is the website. But every Monday, Thursday, and Saturday at the times are different. At 3 p.m. Eastern or noon time Pacific. And we just had Fallon McCullough, who obviously is a good friend of AFA's and of
Yes.
Karen's, and great to see an Irishman in on the West Coast in LA talking about grooming gangs. It was very weird to have two Northern Irish men on the same segment on War Room.
On War Room.
That was a surprise on the same subject.
Yes.
You couldn't have made that up. But no, we have Fallon McCullough was on yesterday. So every Monday, Thursday, and Saturday, noon Pacific time and 3 p.m. Eastern.
That's terrific. Peter, thank you so much.
Thank you, Karen. Always good to chat.